Hello and welcome to our weekly IG Live. I am excited to be talking to Yoshito Darmon-Shimamori, and I'm excited because he is going to be talking to us about his new graphic novel for multilingual teens. And if you missed it, I actually just talked to him last week on Makeaway Media. He also talked about what it's like to do a Kickstarter and why he chose to do that for publishing his book. So if you're interested in either of those topics, we're going to try not to repeat ourselves. Hello.
Hello.
So if you're interested in those, you can hop on over to Makeaway Media and see more about that. Hi, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Good.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Thank you.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to us again. I know running a Kickstarter is very busy time, so I appreciate that, but we can help kind of get the word out about your book. And well, why don't you maybe give a brief explanation about what your book is about, and then we can kind of go into more detail.
Yeah, so to make it short, it's a bilingual graphic novel. So it's a graphic novel that's written in two languages, but not two texts, one next to each other that are saying the same. But part of the text is in one language, so for example, in English, and the second part needs to be personalized with the home language. So it can be personalized to any home language.
And as we'll talk about a little more later, but it is a really interactive book, and it's one of the things that it's designed to do is to help promote biliteracy. And like we already talked on Makeaway Media about the benefits of multilingualism, but a lot of us are familiar with the idea of multilingualism, bilingualism. Could you explain a little bit about what biliteracy means and why it's so important?
Yeah, so biliteracy means being able to read and write in two languages. And so why it's important is that it gives us independence. So it makes us able to, for example, if we go to a country, to not rely on others, but to understand everything. So everything that's spoken, but also everything that's written around us. So I guess it has an effect also on the identity point of view. So when we feel like an insider more than an outsider, and also with biliteracy, you're more independent to expand your vocabulary as well. So you don't rely just on films, for example, or people talking to you, but you can read a book on your own and expand your vocabulary that way. And personally, so from personal experience and what I see with my sons as well, is that, for example, when we watch a film that we really like, if there's a word we don't know, we're not going to stop the film to ask what the word means. But when it's a book, it's a lot easier to just stop and ask what it means and then carry on. So we tend to expand our vocabulary a lot quicker, I would say. But that's from personal experience.
Yeah. That's interesting, especially the last part I hadn't really thought about. That's true. If you're watching a movie or even having, you're not going to pull out a dictionary in the middle of a conversation or a movie, but you would do that with a book. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And also, like you said, there's a lot of vocabulary we don't use in our everyday conversations, or might not come up that you would run across in reading. And I think that's something that gets missed a lot with kids who are, if it's not a language they're learning in school, then a lot of times they're not necessarily learning to read and write, or at least not in a very systematic way.
Yeah.
But something that's also really interesting to me is that you take on one of the myths of bilingualism that I think a lot of us have run across, and maybe we've even had this idea as parents or educators, that in order to be called a bilingual person, you have to have equally good command of both languages. And you say that's not true, and that's something that can really weigh on the children, that they think that they're not really bilingual because they don't speak both languages as well or read as well in both. And how does that affect kids, and how do you address that topic in this book?
So first, that's actually a myth that's really widespread, and I suffered myself from it when I was a teenager. And that's why it was really important for me to put the message out there that it's normal to be an unbalanced bilingual. So to speak a lot better one language than the other, because when you think about it, when you learn or you retain vocabulary, it's because it's needed for you, it's relevant for you. And when you live in a country, you're confronted to a lot more situations that you need to be able to deal with, compared to your home language, where it's generally just the family or maybe friends, etc. But it's a lot less situations. So you generally develop a lot more vocabulary or words in your school language or community language. And I started going on the tangent, so I think I forgot your question.
Oh, just how the myth of that being bilingual means you're completely balanced in both languages, but how that can
Yeah.
burden to the kids, and also how your book deals with this. And I should say you've gotten some great comments here. I love that you're talking about this myth, such an important myth to buzz. I think this is something a lot of us and worry. I know from myself, trying to raise kids that are bilingual, I worry a lot of like, oh, are they really bilingual?
Yeah.
They're so much stronger in one language than the other. This is
Yeah.
something that you deal with
Yeah.
directly in the
That's exactly
story.
it, yeah. It's not just on children, it's on parents as well. We feel like, okay, they should be speaking these two languages at the same level. So if they're not, I'm failing in some way as a parent, and the same for children. So it's something that affects both children and parents. And so the way I try to tackle this in my book is first by having a main character who was an unbalanced bilingual. So she grew up bilingual, but at some point she started speaking less her dad's language. And we meet at 14 years old when she speaks a bit, or she understands a bit, but she doesn't really speak the language anymore. And so just to make it a bit normal, so like we say, representation matters. So it was important to have the main character as someone who was like that. And also, so I deal with it through the story. So it's, as I said, we meet the main character at 14 years old when she is at her grandparents' place, and we can see she just speaks the main language. So for her main language is English, for example, in the English version. It can be French for the French version, etc. And then she doesn't communicate with her family, so she's a bit distant. And throughout the story, she gets to speak more with her grandpa in an imperfect way, but this still enables connection to happen, and she feels connected to her family, and that's why she starts speaking again. So the message as well behind the story of my book is that more than communication, it's connection that's important. So that's why we should try to communicate in any way possible with our family or people we love, because it doesn't need to be perfect. It's more like the quality of the connection you have with the people.
That's such a great way to think about it, because I think if you, like you said, if you're focused on communication, then you worry that if you can't speak it perfectly, that it's not good enough. And I think that is something that I know my kids, when we travel and go visit the side of the family that speaks Spanish, and they think, oh, well, I don't know how to say it. I'm not doing it right. I'm worried I'll get it wrong. But when you have the emphasis on connection, then that's less important. And I think that's something that holds a lot of people back from practicing the second language more, is because they're worried about getting it wrong. But I think what you do so beautifully in the book is show how it's not just about language, it's also family and culture. And like you said, she's really going back to the language as a way to connect to her grandfather. Could you talk a little bit more about that, about how language is so bound up in family and culture, and how that connects to the reading and writing aspect?
Yeah. So I see languages as a tool. So if you can speak a language, you can communicate with people. Well, I said before, when you go in the country, you feel like an insider, not an outsider. So the language enables us to get in the culture. And also the family is important, because it's the people, family and friends, or the people that make speaking the language worth it. So if there is no one to speak it to, there is no point improving on your language. So that's why it's bound, they're bound together. So if you, languages on its own, it doesn't have much value. It's more about what it brings you. So it, on an identity level, you can feel like more as a home, and as being part of a group. And also, it connects you with people. So that's what languages enables you to do. Then, as I said before, for literacy, it's a bit the same, like in terms of feeling like an insider, because you understand the codes. Maybe not how it works in a certain country. There are always things that we might not know how it works because we're not living there. But at least we understand what it says on the menu at the restaurant or signs in the street, etc.
And I think that that moment when you are able to get the joke, or you get to, you know, you, like you say, you understand that you're walking around and you can read the signs on the street. You understand, you know, that's a real, I think a really exciting moment for kids when they realize, oh, I
Yeah.
do, I can understand this.
Yeah.
And we should mention, for those that don't know, if they haven't gone to look at the Kickstarter page, which everybody should do, we'll include the link to that when we post this interview, but you can also go to the link in his bio to get to the Kickstarter, where it explains a little bit more. But could you talk a little bit more about exactly how the graphic novel works, and also how it can be customized for language and culture? Because like you said, it's so important to mention those together, and that this is something that you can really make special just for your family and your particular combination of languages and cultures.
Yeah. So the way it works, as I said before, it's to personalize it. So it's a book that the child reads and completes with their own language and culture. So they are in the same position as the main character, who understands a bit what's going on around her by understanding a few keywords when people speaking to her in her dad's language. And that's represented by having keywords written around an empty speech bubble. So the reader and Anna, who is the main character, they need to use the situation to understand what the people are saying, and then the reader is going to complete the speech bubble in their home language. And the reason it's in their home language is because it's Anna's home language, and it's the same as the reader's one, and they need to complete it in that way. The cultural part is more through illustrations. So there are part of illustrations that are left empty. So it's always things that are to do with cultural things that children understand. So it can be food, it can even be the landscape in the country, or it can be a song. A song would be more in the speech bubbles, but or the fruits you find in your grandparents' country that you don't find in the country you live in. So all these small things that make a culture, and at a child's level.
I love that, and I think that's that interactive element that you talked about. It also makes it really special and unique for the child, that they can add these elements that they remember. And like you said, it gets them to practice the reading and writing, but in a way that's more fun. I know you've talked about how sometimes when we're teaching our kids to read and write in their home language, it can feel like a chore. And like one thing I try to avoid using to describe your graphic novel is as a workbook, although in my mind that's how I'm thinking of it, because it's like a workbook because you're filling it in, but that makes it sound really like school and like, I mean, it has the word work right in it, but so it really isn't, because it's like you said, it's something more fun and not as much of it.
Maybe one thing I can specify as well is that, so to make it not feel like a workbook or like work, I try to keep a 20-80 ratio, which I often use for games I do with my sons, etc. But it's asking for 20% of effort to get 80% of fun. So if they put so the more fun the activity is, the more they're going to be willing to put the effort. So if it's really fun, the 20% are going to represent a lot more. And so they're going to maybe put more details in what they're writing, etc. But also, so 2080 is in terms of numbers of speech bubbles to complete. So I didn't want it to feel like they were reading a story and they need to complete something. They're reading a bit, they need to complete another speech bubble. So there are not that many speech bubbles to complete. So they feel they can still they can still get into the story, enjoy it, and they don't even need to complete the speech bubble straight away. They can just read it and say what they think they could be saying. And afterwards, they can maybe complete the speech bubble. So it doesn't need to be done at once. They can read it completely, then write another time. But the writing and the drawing enables to have the full story, 100% of the story. So it's giving most of the story, and by completing a bit and personalizing it to themselves, it's going to create a full story. So that's another way that's I guess I'd say motivating for the children to get the full story.
Right. And you got a comment about how that's a great ratio, 20/80. I was thinking the same thing. It's something I'm going to have to remember when I'm doing games with my kids. Because like you said, if it is really fun, they might be willing to do more, but I don't want to make too much of a burden. I think sometimes I've done half and half, and 20/80 is a much better way to think about it. I like that. And let's see, we already kind of just making sure I'm not missing anything. You did touch on this already, but I wonder if you could talk about a little bit more about building a child's multilingual identity, and that's something that your book addresses also.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and why that's important, how your book is kind of helping them with it, building that identity?
Yeah, so when I mentioned in my post, etc., that it's a book that helps them build their multilingual and multicultural identity, it's really to say that I want them to be able to feel proud of their identity, and to value their identity, so their culture, their languages. So there is valuing and being proud of it, and that's the main message of my book and how it. So I want the book and the accompanying resources to help them reflect on their own identity, what it means to be bilingual for them. And then also in my resources and the school visits I'm planning, is the message is how you can know about yourself and then take it to the next level, to the superpower level. So that's the term I use, but it's really, once you know your worth, you feel empowered, and that's the main aim of the book, to not have children see their identity as it's not complete because I don't speak fully the language, etc., but to see all the work they have and to expand it a bit more, to feel empowered, to become like superheroes. And so that's a bit extreme, but that's the feeling I want the children to have.
And what a great age for this to happen. I know you said this is for teens, or depending on the child, it might be a little bit younger, depending on where they're at with their language journey. But that's such a great time. That's something I'm thinking about a lot. I have a new teenager in our house. He's just turned 13 a few months ago. And so I've been thinking a lot in all areas of our life about how he is taking on more responsibility, taking more ownership of, you know, in a lot of different areas, thinking towards being an adult and what he's going to do, and his identity, you know, as in his own identity, kind of separate from our family. And so this is a great time to get them thinking about themselves as multilingual, to motivate them to carry that on through into adulthood. So this is, and it's a time period that I think is often missed. There are a lot of bilingual books for kids, or kits for teaching, you know, curriculum for teaching, especially kindergarten or preschool, those really early years. And once they get older, there really aren't as many resources available. What I love about yours too is, like you said, it can be customized to so many different languages. So there might be languages that there are very little resources about, and you can customize this book for whatever language is, you know, even if it's one that is much smaller, or maybe that has a lot less resources available, you can definitely use this book for that.
Yeah, so for example, I'm in contact with people in New Caledonia, and they're all trying to revive their local languages, and children have less interest in them because they don't see the value of speaking them, etc. So, and one thing that they were missing, they say, is resources. So we're trying to see how my book and other resources can help them. But yeah, this book can be really adapted to any home language. You just need to buy the version of your home, community language or school language, and then you complete it with your home language.
Whatever that is. And yeah, it can be any combination. So for us, we're living in the US, so I would buy the English version and then we would complete the speech bubbles in Spanish. But if somebody had a different home language, then they might buy the English version and complete it in French or Ukrainian or whatever the home language is. How many different versions like of the book do you have as far as the language?
So my aim is to have as many as possible in the future, but to start with this Kickstarter campaign, so if we reach the goal, is to publish 6 different languages. So there'll be the English version for English-speaking countries, French version, Japanese, Dutch, German, and Italian.
Wow, that's such a great start. I mean, I know you want to have it in more languages, but that's a great start, and we'll already cover so many families and their situation. And just to wrap up, can you let people know more about the Kickstarter campaign, how they can get involved, what are some of the benefits of becoming a supporter?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the benefits because that's the most important. But in my Kickstarter campaign, so I offer different packages for families, for schools, for sponsors as well. If some people want or their companies want to sponsor my book, but I offer a lot of value for the price. So at the moment, I'm making really cheap, so enough for me to be able to produce everything, but not so I'm adding a lot on top of that, so that people can be rewarded for believing in this project and helping me making it a reality. And yeah, so also the important thing to know about Kickstarter is that it's all or nothing. So unless it's fully funded, I'm not going to get anything. So I won't be able to produce anything. So it's important for people who are thinking maybe it might be really helpful for them in 2-3 years, but right now their children are a bit young, so they wait. If they wait, there might not be this book. So it's important that if they believe in it, they choose something that might be of value to them. And then, so when they go on Kickstarter, they can search for my project, which is In Search of the Lost Words. And then they choose the package they want. And then, and then really important, they need to share around, like you're helping me right now, but to share around with people so that more and more people know about it and they can help with this project.
Wonderful. And like I said, we will post the link to that. And there are a lot of benefits. If you go and look the different packages, there are different worksheets. And so in addition to, depending on the level that you pick, you would not only get the book, but you get a lot of additional resources to worksheets and activities and so on. And like you said, it's a great way to support a really worthwhile project. And it's also less expensive if you support it now versus waiting. And if it gets funded, buying the book later, you're getting a much better value and you're making sure it happens. So you can go to the link in his bio, but we will also include it in the notes for this interview when it's posted. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It's so fun to talk about this book, and good luck. How much longer in the Kickstarter?
15 days. So we're getting close to the end. Yeah.
So be sure, don't be like me and put it on your to-do list and remember in 16 days. Go ahead and do it today. Make sure it happens. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you very much.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.